this rock concert, the first of its kind. Yeah, long story short, he said within a matter of hours, the first day, there were thousands and thousands of young people who converged on Woodstock. The sanitation facilities broke down. It rained. There was mud. The music was great. The pot was great. Some people overdosed, though. They didn't have enough food for the people. A number of people got really sick and they couldn't get them in and out of there because the roads were all blocked. And I mean, if you carry the story on a little bit further after that, just remembering back on it now, that seemed to be a disaster for most of mainstream Cold War America. What were these young people doing? This was the craziest, stupidest thing that ever happened.
Well, it's amazing how popular it was, or that many people knew about it. That close to 500,000 people, made their way upstate New York, to a farm to see this show.
First thing that comes to mind is a kind of cultural revolution, a sort of youth revolt against the values of the previous generation. That there was a generation gap there that was much more significant than anything we've seen since.
There must be some kind of way out of here. Say the joker to the thief. There's too much confusion.
How old was I at the time? Well, I wasn't born yet. I was born 2 years later. But where I grew up in Burlington, Vermont, and this is true of a lot of college towns and bohemian parts of cities, Woodstock never ended. It had to do with the generation questioning, first of all, the war, Vietnam War. And that was the last time that the draft was instituted. So a lot of young people seeing their friends and relatives go away and not come back. And as a result, they began to question all of the values. The way in which the youth generation expressed themselves at Woodstock was a whole new way of living that they were aiming to adopt. And I wouldn't say they completely did that, but there were changes that took place as a result.
Phrase, yeah, when I hear the term Woodstock, of course, I think of sex, drugs, rock and roll. I think of the counterculture.
I mean, the people that were attracted to that festival, that made that journey, nearly 500,000 people. They were, this was the hippie generation, and this was the first, this is right after a very violent time. It's right after the Martin Luther King assassination. It's right after the riots in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention. It's after during the Vietnam War, where there were a lot of protests were going on. So it was a violent year preceding that. And I think that they really were wanting to separate themselves from all that violence. It was really, seen as, as a communal experience.
After 1969, actually after 1968, the New Left, the whole 60s movement in America just unraveled.
I've met a few people over the years that have that were actually there. I think a lot more people pretended to be there than actually were. Just the horror stories of, the 10-mile walk in, all the cars stuck by the side of the road, no one able to go any further. Somebody just got out and walked.
I would say actually it was the moment where the counterculture became the norm. It was the event that represented it, and it represented the counterculture movement. And a lot of things died off after that, but it became sort of the touchstone of what lifestyle they were able to adopt and attempt to make permanent.
I think Woodstock did more to spark the counterculture revolution. I don't think it happened so much because of the movement, but I think it really pushed it pushed the movement forward. I mean, it was such a success on that front as far as that many people getting together and helping one another out in, in horrible, conditions. It was no, sanitation, water, terrible weather, and everyone helped one another out. I think Woodstock is definitely the pinnacle of that counterculture movement. It was the generation gap is what they talked about before. That was the big difference between, their parents were, they saw them as uptight and straight. I don't know. I think that everybody was looking for a reason to do something that represented, more of the peace and love and community that they were feeling than had the violence that had preceded Woodstock. With the riots and the Vietnam sit-ins and the death of Martin Luther King, and I think that this was just a way for people to reach out and do something, that backed up what they were talking about with this, peace and love generation. The music that came out of Woodstock and the bands that played there, I think a third of the bands that played there have already been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and there's, more to follow, I'm sure. So it definitely galvanized rock and roll as the main, musical outlet for these people, for this hippie generation.
I would say the music is what launched it, and the music became what brought all the people together. The music was amazingly original. And progressed really fast in the 60s. So by 1969, what the Beatles had initiated only 5 years earlier had opened the gates for all kinds of styles of music. And the progression of music, the originality, the influential quality has been unmatched in rock and roll. That was the golden age of rock and roll. And it had started with the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan, and by the time of Woodstock had brought in, you had Santana was Afro-Cuban music, Jimi Hendrix was a black artist who crossed over into the mainstream. You had folk music with Richie Havens, you had soul music was coming in with Sly and the Family Stone. So all these previously fringe elements were now adopted by the mainstream.
I don't know if the music influenced people that much, as much as the experience itself did. Just the trek in and out, and the mud and terrible conditions. I think that meant more to people than the music actually did. I think the music at Woodstock, did influence people, but I think as a whole, not as much as the actual experience itself did.
Also, the whole rock festival circuit now, whether it's Bonnaroo here or Glastonbury in England, these became part of the culture that remained.
I know that they've tried to repeat Woodstock. They've had one a couple of years ago. It's probably been more than a couple of years. Of course, you just can't do that accidentally. You can't, or on purpose, you can't, recreate something. It happened in 1969, and it could only happen in 1969 because of what led up to that and what followed that.
With a rose in and out.